You wake up tired, even after a full night's sleep. You sit down to do something productive, and within minutes, you feel distracted, restless, unfocused. So you assume the problem is motivation, that you need more discipline, more drive, more energy. But what if that's not the problem? What if the real issue is overload? Because most people today aren't lacking motivation. They're overloaded mentally, constantly. From the moment you wake up, your brain is being flooded with information, notifications, messages, emails, social media, noise. And even when you're not actively looking at your phone, your brain is still processing everything you've already consumed. It never fully switches off. And that creates a problem because your brain has a limited capacity for focus. Every bit of information you take in uses some of that capacity. Every decision you make uses some of that capacity. Every distraction chips away at your ability to concentrate until eventually there's nothing left. And that's when everything starts to feel harder. Simple tasks feel overwhelming. Small decisions feel exhausting. Things you know you should do feel impossible to start. Not because they're difficult, but because your brain is already full. And when your brain is overloaded, it looks for relief. It looks for the easiest possible option, which is usually more scrolling, more distraction, more avoidance. Not because that helps, but because it feels easier in the moment. And that creates a cycle. You feel overwhelmed, so you avoid. You avoid, so things pile up. Things pile up, so you feel even more overwhelmed. And eventually it starts to feel like you're stuck. Like no matter what you do, you can't get back on track. So you try to fix it the only way you know how. You tell yourself to be more disciplined, to push harder, to do more. But adding more pressure to an overloaded system doesn't fix it. It makes it worse because now you're demanding more from a brain that's already struggling to keep up. What you actually need isn't more effort. It's less noise, less input, less distraction, because clarity and focus don't come from adding more. They come from removing what doesn't matter. Think about the last time you felt completely focused. Chances are it wasn't because you suddenly became more motivated. It was because everything else faded into the background. There were fewer distractions, fewer decisions, less noise, and that's what allowed you to concentrate. Focus isn't something you force. It's something you allow. By reducing the things that compete for your attention. That's why one of the most powerful things you can do is nothing. Not scrolling, not consuming, not reacting, just giving your brain space to reset. Because when you stop constantly feeding it information, it starts to recover. And when it recovers, your ability to think clearly comes back. Your ability to focus comes back. Your ability to take action comes back. And suddenly, things don't feel as hard anymore. The task didn't change. You did. Or more specifically, your mental load did. Most people underestimate how much mental load they're carrying because it builds slowly. It's not one big thing. It's dozens of small things stacking on top of each other throughout the day. Checking your phone first thing in the morning, replying to messages, switching between apps, scrolling without even thinking about it, jumping from one piece of information to the next. Individually, none of it feels like a problem, but together it creates constant background noise in your mind. And that noise doesn't just disappear, it stays there, running in the background while you're trying to focus on something else. That's why you can sit down to do something important and still feel distracted without knowing why. It's not the task. It's everything else you're carrying with you into that moment. And the more you try to push through it, the worse it feels. Because now you're fighting against that mental load instead of reducing it. And that's exhausting. This is why doing nothing for a short period of time can feel uncomfortable. Because for the first time, You're noticing how much is actually going on in your head, all the thoughts, all the unfinished things, all the noise. But that discomfort is part of the reset, because once you sit with it, it starts to settle. Your mind starts to slow down, and the constant need for stimulation begins to fade. That's when clarity starts to come back. That's when things feel manageable again. Not because your life suddenly became easier, but because your mind became quieter. So instead of asking yourself, how do I become more motivated? Ask a different question. What can I remove? What can you cut out? What can you ignore? What can you stop giving your attention to? Because every time you remove something unnecessary, you create space for something important. And that space is where focus lives. That space is where clarity comes from. That space is where progress actually starts. So if you've been feeling unmotivated lately, constantly distracted, unable to focus, it might not be motivation you're missing. It might just be that your brain is overloaded,